Looking for something meaty but made out of plants? You've come to the right place. So this is my first attempt at making seitan by washing flour, and I have to say, it's succulent, juicy, got a nice bite to it. So let's find out how I did it. Welcome to another not steak. This time it's a WTF. As soon as I'd done the mushroom and celery steak, I thought that's going to be a really good one to keep refining and trying different things with. And I've also been thinking about making seitan in the traditional way, which is washing the flour. So I'm not swearing at you, but that's the acronym in the vegan world. I've watched several different YouTube videos now to get the technique right. I haven't tried any of them yet. This is the first time. And I watched Sauce Stash's video last night just to kind of, as I was refining it in my head, okay, how am I going to do this? So I'll pop the link in, but he blends it and then pours it out onto a tray, and it's quite an even texture. So I think that's going to lend itself really well to then folding in the mushroom and celery pieces quite well. This is a multi-step one, but each step is relatively quick. This is 1.5 kilos of strong bread flour. You can do it with plain flour, all-purpose flour, but it's got much less gluten in it. And basically what we're doing is making a dough ball and then washing the starch away from it, leaving us with the gluten. And bread flour has a much higher level of gluten in it. Obviously, if you're celiac, not one for you, I'm afraid. Dump the full bag in, pushing a hole into the middle of the flour here where I'll pour the water in. That's 1 litre of cold water. I'm not going to use all of that, I don't think. We'll see. It wants to hold its shape together but not be too wet. Pour some of it in. And then start working it in with a fork. Decided I'm going to mess it up completely. Pour it out onto the worktop because I think it's just going to give me a bit more maneuverability. You can do this if you've got like a mixer with a dough hook, feel free. I'd recommend doing it that way. I'm going to break this up a little bit and just try and pick up these dry bits and use it as a bit like a cloth. So I've used about 800 mils of water, and I think that might actually be okay. I'm just going to keep kneading it and see what I think. I'm going to break it in half and do it half at a time, just to make it a bit more manageable. You can see already, that's only with a minute or so of kneading, the gluten is starting to develop really nicely. This does look like a massive amount of dough, but by the time I've washed the starch out of it, it's probably going to be only that much, so don't be alarmed. Flours all react differently, and that can be brand to brand, but also possibly even between batches. So the measurements for the water aren't going to be hard and fast. So don't dump in 800 mils of water. Do it some, bit at a time, just because you don't want to end up with it too wet. This is starting to feel very supple now, and it feels a little bit like skin. So I think we're probably at a good enough point, and my wrists are really starting to hurt. Okay, so I'm going to plonk the dough into a bowl, and then I'm covering it up just so it doesn't dry out on the top or anything. And I'll leave this for about an hour just to let the gluten develop a bit more. And I'll crack on with the mushrooms and celery. I'm going to interrupt myself for a second so I can introduce you to this week's partner, which is the Pip Box. This company was set up to curate vegan and cruelty-free cosmetics products, and they do these fantastic monthly subscription boxes. The box they've sent is their Spring Essentials Edit, and I've got a little highlighter which you put on for your face and other parts of your body if you want a little bit of zhuzh. And I've got some micellar water. Now that's kind of a cleansing thing, great for getting rid of makeup or muck. And then I've got like an enzyme exfoliator. conditioner bar. Now these things are becoming more and more popular because it's a way of reducing plastic. So you just hang it up in the shower and scrub it on your hair. And then a little lip oil. So slather it on and have kissable lips all day. As well as their generous gift for me, they've also given you all a discount code. So if you head over to thepitbox.co.uk, enter code Rachel25, and you're going to get 25% off your first order. I mean, what's not to love? I'm going to start creating the kind of seasoning mix, the beef flavour. Use a 1/4 teaspoon of celery seeds, and these have got really nice kind of meaty flavour. Teaspoon of sumac, and because these are a little bit bigger than the rest of it, I'm just going to crush those down first before adding the rest. I'm adding a tablespoon of dried shiitake mushrooms that I've just ground up really finely. 1/4 teaspoon of powdered garlic. I wanted dried onions in here as well, like onion granules, onion powder. Can't find any in the supermarkets, and the order that I placed hasn't arrived in time. So yeah, I'd say maybe 1/2 teaspoon to a teaspoon of onion powder if you've got it. A touch of smoked paprika, just to give it a bit of depth, I think. Again, about 1/4 teaspoon. 1/4 teaspoon of mustard powder. It's English mustard powder, and that's to kind of fool my brain, roast beef and mustard sort of thing. And then for a lovely bit of colour and also an earthy flavour, I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of dried beetroot. You can also use fresh, that's absolutely fine. Good bit of salt, so maybe 1/4 teaspoon. A touch of black pepper. Give that another grinding. And then 2 heaped tablespoons of the beef stock again. Put this to the side. So time to start the washing process of the dough. So I'm going to pour over cold water until it's covered. And you can see the water's already going cloudy. I'm going to leave that for a few minutes just while I gather some other bits and pieces and let it soak. So all we're doing is just moving the dough around in there and sort of squidging it a bit. And this is to release all of the starch. The water's going to go really milky, and that's the wheat starch coming out of it. And I'm going to keep the starchy water because you can make things out of it. So I've seen Sauce Stash make bacon and pepperoni out of it. And I'm thinking I might try some licorice. Just chuck in some licorice root, treacle, maybe some anise. Let's see if I can make a nice little candy. So I'm doing this kind of motion under the water. And I can feel this sort of silky texture, which is the starches. First wash done, so I'm just going to tip the water into another bowl. I'm going to squidge it a little bit into a sieve. Cover it again. Just repeat. Give it a good massage. I'm just swirling it around in a sieve just to get some of this excess starch off. Now if you're doing a chicken type meat, then you want to take it much further than this. But because I'm simulating beef, I want it slightly goopy, which is going to mimic the sort of moisture and fat that's in a steak. Put some lights on because there's a big storm front just come in, so it's gone very dark. Pull a chunk of this off. So I'll do about that much. Doesn't have to be precise. And I'll give this one more wash. So you can see how much of the starch has come out. Lovely and stretchy. I'm just going to lob the bits into the bowl, squeezing out a little bit more starch if possible. So pleased this has worked so far. So that's what we've been left with. So you can see it's much less than you think it's going to be. For the fat marbling that I'm going to try and do, like I saw Sauce Stash do, I'm going to pop in the lump that I took out, so that's had 3 washes. I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of refined coconut oil. Start it up, fingers, toes, arms, legs, everything crossed on my behalf, please. So that's the texture. It is quite wet, but it's still stringy. Decanting this into a bowl. start layering in the flavours here. So I'm going to do about a teaspoon, well, half a teaspoon of Marmite, about half a teaspoon of Treacle, a bit of Henderson's, Cacao, again about a teaspoon. Drop in the seasoning mix. I'm going to do some of the celery juice, maybe half, so that's probably around a tablespoon, and then gloop in the gloop. See. So I'm putting these on just to protect my hands a little bit so I don't look like I've murdered somebody. And I've put a couple of mats down just to protect the worktop. Let's do it. So what I'm doing is just kneading it a little bit just to get the gluten aligned again. Just going to clear up some of this wetness. So I'm going to start putting the veggies on now. I did 800 grams of mushrooms and 4 celery stalks in the exact same way as I did for the knot steak with mushroom and celery. Check out the info card if you want a deeper explanation of how to prepare these. So I've got my mushrooms. Yeah, it's got more of a soil than a sort of strands that I'd hoped for. Half, I think. And half the celery. And then I'm gonna sort of fold these into it, hopefully. Hopefully. Kind of knead it, and I'm hoping, although this isn't necessarily looking ideal, you can see the texture of it, how stringy and stretchy it is. So I think it's going to taste good and the texture is going to be pretty decent, but I need to do a bit more thinking about how to get the mushroom and celery in. Maybe if the mushrooms were in strings the way I anticipated, maybe that would be better. Wrapping it in the muslin. I do want it relatively tight, and then tuck it inside itself. Wrap this in a piece of foil. And again, that needs to be quite snug in there. Squidge up the ends. Once you've got your package nicely wrapped up, nice and tight, you need to then remember that you forgot to do the marbling. So I'm going to try and spread it out a bit. I'm going to sort of arrange this in blobs around it. Roll that up. And then try and flatten it out again. Repeat. Yeah, okay. That does kind of resemble a joint of beef. And then I'll wrap it back up again nicely. A little bit of water at the bottom. Put the package in. So that's in for, oh God, I'm getting blinded. That's in for 40 minutes steaming, and then I'm going to simmer it on the stove. It's now 11:15 p.m. I steamed the seitan for 40 minutes, and then I remembered that I had an online staff party at 8. So I've spent the last 3 hours doing bingo over Zoom and drinking. So I thought I'd carry on that. Let's unwrap the little beastie. It's certainly got a nice bouncy texture to it, so hopefully this has come out pretty good. Should have listened to my gut instinct, which was to rewrap it in baking paper. Oh, what a silly thing to do. I guess that's because the gluten was so much wetter than it would be with vital wheat gluten. So it kind of oozed into the holes a little bit. Tortellini, that's what it's reminding me of. Just like tortellini, it's like the little stuffed pastas. Okay. I mean, it's not the sort of meat flavour that I was after, but nonetheless, it's much preferable to the vital wheat gluten flavour. So let me try, that's the sort of fat bit that I did. So I'll try a bit of this one. That's not bad at all. Touch too much celery. It's noticeable as celery, but it's got a really good texture. The texture is somewhat similar to chicken thigh. I'm going to sear it off in the pan and then poach it for an hour. There is an acronym and I can't remember what it is. I'll insert it here. I made a couple of olive tapenades. It's like a spread made out of olives. I'll put the link up there once it's done. And for the green olive one, I confit some garlic. So it's just very low temperature olive oil and garlic, cooked for about 45 minutes or so. So I kept the oil and I'm going to use it to fry that off. I just think a bit of extra garlic flavour in there will be really nice. And while this warms through, I'm going to explain these. So I've got something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it affects my whole body, but relative to this, it affects my joints. And when I sat down earlier at the computer, my wrists and finger joints really started hurting, and I think it's because of the amount of kneading. I will be honest with you, if you've got any kind of joint problems, mobility issues, anything like that, do try and find some shortcuts. So if you've got one of the big stand mixers with a dough hook, you can knead the dough in that, and then you can also wash it in that, apparently. This is what I've read, just to take some of the strain out of your joints, because you've got to go at it with so much force, and then you've got to be quite nimble as you're washing the starch out. So yeah, that's gonna be pretty bad for me tomorrow. And what I'll also do is put some more flavour in the poaching liquid, just to really maximise the amount of taste that's in there. I've pulled out some beef stock. So this is something I've cooked seitan in before, that I've used to poach it in before. So, and then chucked it in the freezer. So I'll pull that out and use that. And then I forgot to put coffee in the meat mixture, which I didn't plan on doing. So I'll chuck a bit of that in. And the same with the tequila. So tequila, I find, for me, it gives it a sort of game almost flavour, a bit like venison, that kind of thing. Bit of Marmite, bit of beetroot, some more oil, just to give a nice finish to it. Yeah, and then it'll bubble away in a little bath for an hour and just soak up a little bit of extra flavour. Just want to get a little bit of colour on the outside, not tons. I'm going to put the seitan onto a plate just for a second. I'm going to start building the flavour in here. I'm going to dump in that beef stock. And I'm turning it down to 2, because this needs to be just a very gentle simmer, because if it's bubbling too much, you're going to end up with really soggy, brainy seitan. We don't want that. We want something nice and chewy and firm. I'll do a good splash of the tequila. So a little squeeze of Marmite, 1/4 teaspoon, something like that. Another teaspoon of beetroot powder. Do maybe 1/2 teaspoon of instant coffee granules. Tablespoon of oil. This is the garlic olive oil again. And a bit of extra salt. I'm going to add a touch more sumac, ground sumac. A little touch more mustard, so maybe 1/4 teaspoon. And another tablespoon of the mushroom powder. That's the ground shiitake mushrooms. I'm going to use some of this tamarind paste. Should have put some of this in the meat, actually. Didn't think of it. This has that sort of irony, tangy meat sort of flavour. Now I'm going to add my little baby into its bath. I'm going to turn it just to get it soaked on both sides. I've just poured in enough water to make sure that it's at least half covering the meat, roast, whatever we're going to call it, just so it poaches evenly on all sides. And I'm going to poach this, keeping an eye on it just to make sure it's not bubbling too hard, and let it go for half an hour, flip it over and do it for another half an hour. And I'll see you back here tomorrow for the eating. It is dinner time the following day. I am very ready to eat this, let me tell you. Once I finished and went to bed last night, well I say last night, this morning, at 2 a.m, I suddenly had the idea of, oh, I've got all of that liquid that I poached the seitan in. Could I do something with that? So I decided to make a sauce. So I boiled down 200 mils of port, let that reduce for about 7 minutes on a gentle boil. I then added in a handful of dried onion flakes, about maybe 50 grams, bunch of thyme, maybe 10 grams, and then added in the stock. Now I'd filtered the stock, so there was about 800 mils in total, so a litre of liquid altogether. and then let that again gently boil for around 20 minutes, half an hour, until it seriously reduces. So this is what's left from 200 mils. And that's just going to be a delicious little sauce on its own. You could drink it really. Once I strained the thyme and the onion for the sauce, it's left me with all these lovely, deliciously tasting bits. So I think I might combine the onion and thyme with the leftover mushrooms that I was supposed to put in the steak. And I might make a burger out of it. Maybe chuck some oats in, and I might put a splash of the wheat starch just to help bind it, and chuck some pea protein in as well, just to make a little burger. But let's have a look at the seitan, shall we? So I'm gonna cut the end off. So this is where we're at. And it's actually stayed a little bit red from the beetroot, which is great because quite often it'll just go brown. But the texture is looking really good, really good. Okay, let's have a try. That's tasty, like really tasty. Still has a slight gluten flavour, but yeah, it's kind of more pasteury than the Vital Wheat gluten type seitan. And the texture, I mean, it just looks very, very meaty. So I've got the lighter bit there, and that's the fat marbling that I put in through, that I almost forgot to do. That would probably make a really good Wellington, you know, wrapped in pastry with a mushroom duxelle around it. This is the poaching liquid after I filtered it. I just ran it through a really, really fine gauze sieve, and I thought I might inject some of it into the steak before pan frying it, just to add a bit of extra moisture, but honestly it doesn't need it. These are so succulent. If I can get some light into it, it's just very juicy already. It doesn't need anything else. I've decided I'm going to make some ribs. Same technique, same amount of washing, because I think it's the starches that have kept it so juicy. If you do want it a bit drier, just wash it maybe 4 or 5 times, and that's going to take out more of the starch and give you a much tighter chicken breast sort of feel to it. But for me, for ribs, I think that's going to be great. And I think I'm going to make a barbecue sauce using cola. I'm going to boil down a big bottle of it so it gets to a really thick syrup, and then mix some other stuff in there and glob that on. And to simulate the rib bones, I bought a pack of cedar planks. So these are the sort that you use on a barbecue to give some flavour to your meat. And I think it's going to work really well. I'm going to chop these down into sort of inch-wide pieces, sand it off, so then it's a nice kind of piece, and then build the rib around that. I think that's going to work really, really well. So for more meat substitute explorations, make sure you hit subscribe, tap that bell icon, and check out a few of these.